All right, so I have started the recording. Schools throw away much more. Yeah. All right, so I am ready to get started. And so group study, different than my dynamic for the podcast. Podcast, I come up with this topic and I just kind of go with it, but I don't really have that today. I have some things to talk about, I suppose, but how about you guys? So this is a group study. So we're talking about everybody here practicing. I'm practicing, you're practicing. What does it look like? How are things going? Do you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything about the practice that you need to know? Yes,
It's
Gene.
I'm working on the things we talked about previously, and that is just I'm at the stage of trying to remember more than I forget. I remember that every time I remember, I'm moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm breathing. I'm being patient. I notice when I remember, and mostly I treat it positively. I check in to see if I'm kicking myself in the butt or losing power, and I believe I'm not. I end up reciting my "this day shall end, and then we'll know how the day went," kind of thing, which has really helped me quite a bit. Instead of projecting
Mm-hmm.
or imagining or wishing it was so, I let it happen, and then I remember that when the day ends or the week ends or 3 months is over or when I get the next test, I'll know where we are, and then I'll deal with that when that comes. So that's been very helpful for me.
Awesome. That makes perfect sense. So I think that also illustrates, let me clear my throat real quick, just a second. So I think it illustrates kind of how a mantra can be more of an individualized thing. In the voice of power, the mantra is the way to sort of activate that voice. And the voice of power will start to, or inner guru starts to kind of change its complexion. But in the beginning, we're telling ourselves something. And so Gene just shared the something that he's telling himself so that he's not being passive with unproductive thinking or directions of the mind that weren't chosen. That makes sense to me. So if we were going to, do a little bit more of a focused practice in terms of I'll, give more suggestions of what you can do and how to do it, because I've really organized these things. So that's something I've done in my mind and a little bit on paper over, the last year or so. So we have the 4 modes practice, right? And the 4 modes practice begins very informal. It's not a formal meditation. A formal meditation is something you do for a certain period of time in a certain way, in a certain place. So, if Ida wants to do a yoga practice at 2 p.m., that's probably going to look a little bit more like a deliberate formal practice. Informal is when we take that with us. So the 4 modes begins informally, and it involves checking into the way that we're sitting. It involves checking into the way that we're standing, the way that the body is moving. And if you do have the opportunity when you lay down, you can do some belly breathing because you can use gravity. It's easier to feel that expansion of the belly when you inhale and then the relaxation when you exhale when you're laying down. You can just really accentuate that entire process and you can really feel into it more. And then gravity's helping you so it can stay smooth, and that's nice. So one way to look at this, it could all begin as a standing meditation. So if you could imagine this practice, and I'm, delivering it in a more structured way this time, or, in this imaginary scenario, right now I am giving you more structure. You know, it doesn't have to be that way, of course. You can do whatever you want. But if we were going to add more structure, we could first just start looking at the points of attention in a standing meditation. So you can imagine that figure that, you know, sometimes I would share on Facebook or I would share in the group chat. I think Ida did a nice drawing of this figure of a person doing a standing meditation. So I can show you more another time about what that looks like when you're standing and physically, and like some of the easiest ways to go about this so that it doesn't feel, because you just be surprised how quick old patterns sink in. How long can I do this? How low can I go down? Am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Is this how Ernest would? And before you know it, we're just chasing rabbit holes or chasing rabbits down holes again. And that's not, and then before you know it, you're doing nothing except for, you know, spinning again. The hamster wheel is going. Does that make sense? So standing meditation. So that I'm kind of bringing in the focus, and try this. And then maybe between now and next week, you can tell me a little bit more, and I'll outline it fully before we go. And this is kind of in relation to what Jean had to say. But does that make sense? Standing meditation, a standing posture that we take. Any questions about that?
Yes, I do that not every morning when I remember to do my 18 gates, and it's most mornings. At the very end, I would do about 2 minutes standing meditation, and well, then into your head comes all the stuff like I could be doing something else. I need to get a move on. I have to get out and do this, get to the shop, do the other things, and you have to remember really to bring yourself back to the moment, why you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Listening has become really good. When doing the stand meditation, I'm in the kitchen, so I can hear the fridge behind me, hear the birds outside. Stuff like that really helps to bring me back into the moment whenever I find my mind going away to the next thing and the next thing. But I try to do a couple of minutes, and then my body wants to rush off and do something else. That's where I'm
Sure.
at.
And if it were me, I would let it do that. I would just take the standing meditation with me. So if you know, I felt like I just needed to go do something else, there's no rules. That's the BS that we add to everything, is that we have to do it for this amount of time, or you know, it needs to be this structured in this way to equal this result. And that's a hustle. You know, that's, so if a teacher is trying to sell that, there's a variable called the human being, the person. Like that's such a wild variable that to say do all these things in this exact way. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you to do these things in this exact way, and we'll see how that goes. No, so the the thing is, if I can establish certain tricks of attention when I'm standing, that helps to reinforce it in the body. That way I don't have to think about the points of attention as much when I'm moving and when I'm sitting and when I'm laying down. Now, I don't have to think about them as much. They'll require a degree of my deliberate attention, because that's what this practice is. So I still have to pay attention. I don't get to check out and just maintain things. That's not how it works. But there'll be less talking yourself through it, because you did it in the standing meditation. You can go ahead and talk yourself through it. That's another part of the voice of power, because you're deliberately, intentionally talking to yourself in a way that points back to the practice. So I would recommend beginning with the feet and the hands. So when you're doing a standing meditation, and I'll post a picture in group chat about how to do this one. One of the best ways to begin, and the reason, and I say best, is because it can help remove all of the BS the mind might want to go through. Am I doing this right? The way that you're standing will make it right. It just makes it right when you do it. And I'll show you that later. So you do learn a little bit about a physical posture in the standing meditation. What I mean is you learn a little bit about placing the weight across the entire foot. How can you do that if you don't pay attention to your feet? You can't, you know. And there's no reason not to, other than we have habitually gone away from even weight distribution in our feet. Look at a baby when they first start walking and tell me that their weight isn't evenly distributed. Their posture is perfect. The back, it has the perfect curve. They sit and it's just like you literally look like a little Buddha right now, the way that you're sitting, because your posture is impeccable. So we already know all of that. Okay, so imagine yourself in a standing meditation or in a standing posture. I recommend, eventually we'll add more to the physical body structure, but I don't want to pay attention to that too much in the beginning, because again, that could just become a sticking. Am I doing this? I'll just say it's very hard to do this wrong. You're either doing it or you're not. So I'll still be very detail oriented because that's how I am. But the bottom line is, where is your mind and did you put it there? Is your third pillar active? Then everything is going according to plan, if so. If these thoughts about how long am I doing it, when I'm doing it, and you redirect it with the rule of three, you are doing this practice impeccably. That's how it should be done. But I will still be wildly detail oriented just to help this along so that you have even more points of attention that you could potentially pay attention to. So standing meditation, I recommend beginning with the feet. And you don't have to add imagination, but everybody here can feel their feet very likely. If your feet hurt, go to your hands. Very rarely do our hands hurt unless we have like some sort of like arthritis. And if that's the case, we can move to other parts of the body. And then, of course, we go outside of the body as well very shortly. So we don't stay inside the whole time. In fact, this group is practiced enough, we could just immediately add listening behind us. And so Ida was talking about all those sounds. You can do a different standing meditation, and I think that's great. You could do your own, you could make up your own type of standing meditation. I applaud that. This particular one would involve listening behind you. And you would still, if hopefully, if possible, you're still aware of your feet, the contact point between you and whatever surface is below you. Is it a cool surface? Is it a warm surface? Is it a flat surface? Does it have edges? Can you feel the little cracks in the porcelain? Or, not the cracks, but the little boundaries, the little lines for each tile, the contour of the floor. Can you feel that? And it doesn't matter how much, like we're not trying to do anything, you're not trying to sense into the floor so that you can sense a person in another room. If you can do that, cool. Let me know, but that's not the goal. The goal is just, is your mind deliberately placed? The answer is yes or no. So does that all make sense so far? Any questions about that? So the hands are great. Remember, oh, Carly's not here. Wasn't it Carly who was asking about the dantian? So placing the hand, put attention on the hand, and then put the hand in that area. So now you're putting attention on your hand, but because where it's at, you're also placing attention in that dantian area. And that can help charge and activate that area as well. If you're good with using imagination, do that, and it could be, you could imagine your hand radiating light, radiating heat. It could have a color associated with it if you want to. That's all optional, but it's superimposed over the present moment. So you're not escaping, you're not daydreaming, you're using the power of imagination that you were given as a result of the evolution of human consciousness. We're just going to use it as a tool rather than just forget it when we get older. Or because we've gotten older, I should say. We're already there.
And the upshot of that is that it feels really good. I find that the more the stand meditation, the more I kind of use that idea that Donna has. If you remember, you're doing it. So I've been more relaxed about it and want to do it now. And when I do it, it feels so good, and the time goes in much faster. It surprises me how long I can stand. Sometimes, I think it's 2 minutes, but it might be 5, because it feels nice when I'm doing it. It feels good. That feeling of outside your body and inside your body, large and small. There's a kind of an in-between bit where your body's in. That might not make sense, but I
It
can
does.
feel something when I'm
Mhm,
doing it, and the something is nice.
mhm. Yeah, so if you do this formally, that is literally just to establish your points of attention. So if you decide to wake up in the morning or if you do it in the afternoon and you're like, okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a standing meditation, you're literally checking into these points of attention and that's it. That's the gist. That's the point. That's the goal, is to just place your attention on these points and then move with them. Go into your other mode because you're not going to stand there for very long. And nor do I think you need to or should you, you know. Some of us we're busy. I look down there at Lisa. Lisa's pretty busy person, We don't really have time to be standing around for, 20 minutes at a time, three times a day, you know. Maybe, we have different circumstances. Donna's now retired. Maybe she does, and that's something that she's interested in, then I would say that that's fine. But the trick here is that we're using the standing meditation to establish something, and then we move with it. What I like, Ida, is that every single time your body comes to a standing rest, meaning that you're not moving, you're standing, you are doing a standing meditation. That's this practice. That's T. That's taking it with us. So that now, because that feels so good, you're constantly using standing as a reset. That's why I look out the window. I look out the window in a particular way. When I'm standing at the cash register, I'm standing there in a particular way. When Shayna's looking for me in the grocery store, she can always spot me because I'm standing in a particular way. So I take the standing meditation with me because it's moving. That's a part of the four modes. It has the exact same points of attention. That's the key. That's what I'm hoping to share with you today, is that we can establish our points of attention in a standing meditation. And then those same points can go with us when we're moving, when we're sitting, and when we're laying down. At all points throughout the day, those can become our established points of attention. And that will build and lead to something else, such as occupying your bubble of perception. When you start to fill the bubble of perception, you're paying attention to the detail of the moment. When you start paying attention to all the detail without judging it, Ida, that's when that dream walking magical effect starts to happen, because now we're seeing what would normally be things that our mind would just skip right over. It's now giving it attention from a particular point of view. That's not judging it. That's not labeling it. Not trying to change it necessarily either. It doesn't have to be beautiful. You're just looking at it. And then that type of appreciation and connection occurs. And then that's what Buddha is feeling when he's looking at just a plain old grain of sand and finding all of eternity in it, because that connection has been established. And now you're looking at a doorknob, and you might not be moved to tears because of the doorknob, but you're still establishing a connection with it, that you might take a picture of it because the light is hitting it from a certain way and it just moves you. That's what I call dream walking. Does that make sense?
It makes
Yes,
sense.
Yeah,
I think,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ida, go ahead.
I was just going to say that finding pleasure when you're standing in the grocery store or just going from place to place in the ordinary small things that you mentioned, the grain of sand, that happens more and more, and it's nice. You don't need anything special or mind-blowing or just the ordinary is sacred, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that I think you're both saying the same thing. Ernest, part of what you're saying is that if we do this and establish this, then we can choose to take it wherever we go. And Ida's taking it just from a feeling standpoint, not from a procedural and structural standpoint, is that it feels the momentum and the habit and the feeling of it feels so good that it is what I prefer to do when I'm in the grocery store. You spoke of yesterday, or someday, I don't know, all day is one now, about being at work and people being bored, and you're like, I'm never bored. Like, how can you be bored? I mean, certainly I would rather be productive at work for what they hired me for, but if there's not a lot of work happening, there's plenty of things to do with my mind. And there comes a point at which the momentum and the habit and what you can't help but notice occurs, and that is, it is much more desirable to be engaged than it is to be bored. And that's just a virtue of the practice, that you know that. And for Jean, the mantra is something that I know when I was writing down things on note cards and saying a mantra, it was to remind me of the feeling and the concept that was the reason I chose this mantra. It meant something to me. It had a feeling associated with it. It reminded me of things to do of the practice. But after a while, like you have said, just touching my pocket and knowing that the card was there, it was like a touchstone. I just went right to the feeling of it, right to remembering, right to practice. I didn't even have to say the words anymore because I've used it so much and so well. And once it doesn't work for me anymore and it becomes something that's just a card in my pocket, then I need to do something else or add more data points. But I think you're all saying the same thing, just one's from an instructional standpoint, how to gain momentum. The other is what it feels like to gain momentum. And then, like you said, we're all human and we're all different. So we have different doors into that place, different windows into that place, different practices into that place.
Yep, that makes sense to me. So, and of course, like, you know, it's all for the feeling. So we add different points of attention. So we started with feet, and then we go to hands. And then I think it's suitable to start building that golden line, the Dantian area, the center of the chest, and then it really is more towards the forehead. You know, so if you have all three of those points over each other, well, now you're in a certain type of postural alignment. Now, the only reason I think that the posture is important is so that energy can flow. You know, the body does have a shape to it that if it's not in an obstruction type of posture, then the energy can flow more smoothly. That starts with the mind. When the mind is relaxed, now the energy can start to flow more smoothly, and then the body can be, I would say it's just a little bit more natural, because a lot of the things that we do in our daily life is sitting isn't a natural thing. And I use the word natural very loosely because that's always changing too. There's no set nature to anything. So yeah, to kind of echo, breathing is simple and in the posture as well. Yeah, the breathing, the way that I would recommend it is simply smoothness. Breathing with the least amount of muscular tension. You don't have to have, when you start moving, the breath doesn't have to be coordinated with the movement necessarily. Smooth first. But I do think that there's other times where audible exhale or, you know, more of a forced breath can still be beneficial. Those would be more like emergency techniques. And we'll get into all of that as well if you want. You know, I can definitely put that into a perspective. So yeah, I love the way that Ida is kind of going into how it feels. And then, you know, so I'm kind of describing how to get to that feeling using points of attention, relaxing the mind, and then we become mobile with it and it starts to go with us everywhere. And now we're taking that feeling of paying attention with us. And the more that we talk about this, you know, it's really hard not to talk about the destroyers. And that just helps to organize the information. So it's not supposed to be, you know, ominous. It's not supposed to be scary or anything, even though I'm using the word destroyer. I suppose that puts a certain degree of emphasis on something, doesn't it? I could have called it something else. But that would fall under the entertainment destroyer. And the destroyer is fed by the nemesis. This can be really beneficial later in your practice. I imagine these now. So Ida did me a solid, and she painted what I now view as the four destroyers, the Nemesis, Death, and the Great Revealer. So she kind of put a picture of what this looks like. The Nemesis is the destroyer of peace. That's where peace goes, is because of the Nemesis. The Nemesis is unconsciousness. So if Gene is down there thinking his own thoughts, kind of just like not really paying attention, kind of just going back to what's for breakfast and like, what am I going to do today? That is the Nemesis. That's a result of, so that is unconsciousness. He's feeding that Nemesis. And I call it Nemesis because that is what robs us of peace. A mind is beginning to fight itself and its environment when it's going towards those types of patterns. And so every moment that the mind is unconscious, it's feeding the Nemesis. And then that Nemesis fuels these destroyers. They're very specific to our species, to our, society, what we're doing in the world. It's very specific to that. And so the Nemesis in question, that it sounds like Donna and Ida are kind of talking about, they're loosening the grip of that destroyer, is entertainment. And entertainment becomes such a powerful destroyer because when the mind is unconscious, it needs new, it needs more and more and more stimuli to be entertained. And this dynamic gains momentum and it gets so disproportionate that now we find murderous things, dramatic things, dangerous things. We find those entertaining. And before you know it, you have video games where they're reenacting war scenarios. I mean, I get it. I played these games too, so I'm not over here on a soapbox like this is bad. No, I'm not saying that, But it is an indication of something. It does show us something about the human species, that we've gotten to the point where we could take one of the most miserable situations in human scenario. In the human scenario is to destroy one another in war. And we've made an entertaining thing out of that. And it's fun. And we enjoy it. And we just want to get together and just shoot each other all day. So again, I'm not on a soapbox. That it's a thing. And, if you like it, you like it. That's the result of your entire, totality of your life experience. We don't have to declare war on it. We don't have to try to change it. All of that will take care of itself in its own. Those wrinkles they'll do their thing as we go along. But what's occurring is most people can't stand because their mind requires more stimuli. I must watch TV. I must look at my phone. I must read. I must talk. How often will you walk, I guess unless you're in Japan, because I've heard that this is a thing in Japan, but how often will you walk down the street with a lot of people and everybody is just okay with the day? They're just okay with each other's company. There's no need to talk about it. Again, I'm not declaring war on conversation. It can exist. It's fine. But when a person is just compelled to talk, it's typically because their mind isn't entertained. And now the destroyers feed off of one another. What am I going to talk about? Society shit. I'm going to reinforce that. Or my biological shit. I'm going to talk about my mating rituals, or, I'll start talking about food and things like that. Again, is there anything wrong with talking about food? Heavens no. I'm not up here on a soapbox trying to pretend that I'm better. But when these things become so disproportionate, they don't make us feel good when we're not getting it, when we're not getting that stimuli that we think we need. And what this practice does is you start to pay attention to everything. You're not judging it, and it just starts to kind of reveal itself to you in a certain way that now you feel entertained in your own being, in your own attention, in your own awareness. You can find a sense of entertainment. Is that as entertaining as watching a really funny movie or something like that? Maybe not, so there's still room for that. But all of a sudden you find more balance. It's not required. I don't have to talk right now. We can, but I don't have to. I don't have to watch a movie. We can, but I don't have to. Do you see what I mean? It's the I don't have to is where the freedom is. That's the definition of freedom. You can, but you don't have to. You're free to choose. And that's what this practice can definitely, start to bring out. And I think that's what Ida and Donna are kind of illustrating, is that the practice starts to create a feeling. And that feeling is a type of entertainment source as well, because it feels good and we can pay attention to that. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to make a couple other recommendations, and I try it, see what happens. But I do recommend an object of power, and I do recommend writing it down, a note card, a piece of paper, in some way, shape, or form. Create something that you can take with you that will serve as a reminder. Why not? I don't understand why that would be a problem. Maybe you don't look at it. Maybe you put that sucker in your pocket and you don't look at it once. Fine. The next day, maybe you do. And maybe you look at it at just the right time, that it serves you greatly, and you redirect your mind and you get right back where you need to be going and you feel good about it. So that's also a possibility. But there's no potential if it's not in our pocket, like if we haven't written anything down. And what I recommend writing down are, you could do voice of power type stuff. You could write down mantras, things that you believe. You could set yourself up for a situation. Maybe you need some situational awareness, situational attention, because you have an interview coming up or whatever. I use an interview a lot. I don't know. That's one example of many things, but you have something important coming up and you want to be a little bit more at peace and balanced. You could have situational things. So before I move on, does that make sense? And I am giving you my practice, but there's a reason I did it. I don't do it arbitrarily. Anything that doesn't add to the practice, I trim it. You've seen me do that. Okay, so I'm going to recommend it, and I would love some feedback. Go ahead and give it a try, see what happens. But I also recommend an object of power, something physical that you can take with you throughout the day, something that will serve as a reminder if you place your attention on it. It can be anything like a rock. It could be, yes, whatever that is, Gene. That's a frog. It could definitely be that. Absolutely. And an object of power, it can remind you of your practice whenever it's in your hand, whenever you think about it in your pocket. It could be a pin on your lapel. Absolutely. And maybe you find that one that has a little bit more weight is a little bit more easier to feel on your body or whatever. And now that has more power. It just needs to remind you of your practice and point back to the present moment. It's not judgment. It's not there to point how often you've forgotten. It's just there to point you back to the practice so that you can remember. So we have an object of power, and we have something that we're writing down and we're taking with us. So you've seen my note card. It has two sides to it. Typically on one side, it will have, I use pictures sometimes now, but that's a mantra. It's reminding me of something. Usually it's a picture because I want to visualize. That's where I'm at in my practice. Remember, I lose imagination first. That's one of the first points of attention to go in the constructed points of attention that I've assembled. And so sometimes on my note card it would be a picture, and that picture is to remind me of some feelings and some things to do with my imagination. And I have a really big point on imagination that I make in my book, The Voice of Power. It's right towards the end. So no spoilers, but I believe that imagination plays an absolutely critical role in the development of the human species and the evolution of consciousness. I think you can see this throughout history. The ancients have been talking about it, and I think that we've missed it. And so I'll highlight it and talk about it in my book. You could draw something new every day and take that card with you as a reminder. But Ida, you could also not do it every day. That's not the point. It's just doing it and then having the attention back in the moment. You don't have to do it every day unless you want to. So what it will look like is eventually you'd be able to look at a little figure of a person and there'll be all these points of attention. We'll be doing the bubble of perception. You can do defocused vision. You can start to focus on certain shapes. You can talk these shapes out. This shape is different than that shape. Different colors. I've been playing with colors even more. Which colors are most predominant in the room? Where are the colors that I've been looking for today? Maybe today's red, maybe tomorrow's blue. I recommend shadows. I recommend reflections. I recommend these points inside the body. And then you end up with like 20 or 30 points of potential. That's all you need. I mean, let's be honest. I recommended a diverse toolbox, but you still have to be paying attention to something in that toolbox, and that's where the power is. So you could have 3 things in your toolbox. If you're paying attention to all 3 of them, it will work. Or any one of the 3, or yeah. And eventually it will look like the mind gazing, to where you're putting attention into different parts of your brain. That, I believe, that has a real effect. But also putting attention into different parts of your body so that your posture improves, so that the energy flows better, so that your joints just have more space in between them. Because I can show complex movement, and then I like to keep things binary just for this organization, but you have complex and simple movement. So the 18 gates, these breathing exercises, those are simple. When we start doing Tai Chi movement and we're rotating, that's going to be more complex. They both have a place in the world, I think. All right, so in terms of group study, like, do you have any questions? Is this helpful? Do you think this is something that you can work with? And maybe in the future I'll have instructional materials, and then you could take those materials, you could look at them, you could use them as reminders throughout the day. It would also be adding to your toolbox throughout the day. What are some different things I can pay attention to? What kind of olfactory senses, like how can I smell into the world? How can I listen into the world? How can I pay attention to different temperatures or how soft things feel? I've been rocking this cardigan for like 5 days because it feels so good when I put it on my skin. And I have a shirt underneath, so it's not getting stinky. I'm all good. But I like the feel of the softness. That's a point of attention. I deliberately place my attention there, as Ida would point out, because it feels good. And as Donna would remember, sometimes it serves as a reminder because the feeling is a reminder. And that's when our practice is really going to gain some momentum. The feeling is so important. That's how we start to get into the emotional intelligence. And then emotional memory. So as a recap, so I lost my job on Friday, and I've had an energy dip. So I can feel that my physical energy, it's just not, I'm not on that high flying disc right now. And that's okay. And I see no problem with that whatsoever. It's not going another direction. It's my mind isn't feeding it with thought. It's not getting worse. It's just the reaction that I had to the situation. And I feel it improving constantly. But it's improving as a result of the practice. I'm not trying, so someone would say, try to feel better. Don't let it get you. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to do my practice, and it will move how it will. It will move how it will move, without force, without trying to control, without trying to change, without trying to manipulate. No, it's not an ideal feeling, but hopefully I don't get fired, once every 3 months because it's a situational type of feeling, And I don't do what some of the people on Facebook recommend. I don't really emphasize it and really, let's really dig into this and find out where it's coming. No, that's also unnecessary. That will just make it worse. So I still feel inspired. I still feel really creative. I still feel really good despite everything. But I can still just feel this little energy dip because I now have that job at super insecurity. I don't have a job. That's the definition of job insecurity, is no job at all. But I'm not letting it get me down. It hasn't gotten to the point of worry, and I'm only communicating it now because that's the challenge in my island of the practical right now. That's what I'm moving and adapting to. And I think it's really important that I don't try to change the feeling that had already occurred. I'm not trying to change that reaction. It is what it is. Maybe when I get fired 10 years from now or let go or whatever, that reaction will be even different. Do you see what I mean? I don't need to try to change it. And I definitely don't want to force anything. That becomes a type of toxicity when you're always trying to change how you feel. Constantly trying to change how you feel just paints you into another corner. And you're not free. Now you depend on those feelings to do anything. No, I can be a little bit sad. I can take something and transform it into something else. No, I don't want it to get to anger. No, I don't want it to get to frustration. No, I don't want it to get to worry. And none of that will happen if the direction of my attention is where I want it to be. Those thoughts won't stand a chance. And they haven't. I haven't even gone anywhere near those thought streams. But every now and then I stand up and I need a hug because, I'm not over here doing cartwheels. And that's like even when I got the job and I was buying new clothes, I was reminding myself to stay balanced. Anything could happen. And do you see how much that benefited me by staying Donna, I felt the excitement. There was an appropriate response of excitement, but I'm not going to feed that with thought. I'm not going to feed that with unnecessary energy to take that excitement from stupid, just over here acting stupid. You got great deals on your house and you felt that excitement, but you didn't feed that. You didn't feed that excitement with unconscious habit that would take it to acting stupid. I don't know. Maybe I don't have to call it acting stupid, but you know what I mean? Like we get all woo, and then before you know it, you're waking up in Las Vegas with a ring on your finger and you don't remember your last name. That's a country song. So this whole thing is again just about balance.
Yeah,
Yes.
what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, so I'm not going to say anything about that. But I do get angry, and I hear what you're saying, and I absolutely understand. I'm not. It takes me longer to notice how far out of balance I am to redirect than you have just described, but it's certainly far sooner than before I started this or any practice of mindfulness. And the house stuff is a perfect example. I mean, I got 25 offers on my house. 25. That's just insane. There were 90 people through my house in 3 days, and they came in one at a time because of COVID restrictions. So they were literally lined up in the court when I got up in the morning. So it's easy to get carried away. And I felt the pull of all of that because it's a lot to retire, move, and do all that stuff at one time. It's a lot of change in what is familiar. But I found that to be helpful to my practice, actually, because everything is new and different. So my practice was the grounding force. My deliberate attention was the thing that held it all from being a bunch of chaos in my perception. So anyway, the top offers, the first offer I accepted was 6th down on the line. And it's easy to get carried away with these giant numbers, these giant numbers that you'd never anticipated. And I explained that when we sat down to review the orders with the realtors, that I'm not going to be carried away by that, because a lot of people in this market are using different tactics to try to get their foot in the door. And I don't want to be manipulated. I want to stay grounded so I can feel what feels right. The first offer I accepted fell through because I literally, I'm not going to go into all the details, but somebody came to look at the pool, and it was the father-in-law and not the buyer. And his attitude I didn't like. He spoke to me like like a woman, like a woman that you don't have to pay much attention to, and I can bulldoze right over her. And that's the last thing you want to do with me. I come from a long line of Sicilian men who I've had to learn how to find my voice amongst. So that wasn't flying, and I threw him out of the yard. And I was out of balance at that point. I trusted my gut. I knew it was the right thing to do. This was not the buyer. The realtors were like, what? Please promise you won't go out there and talk to them. We're coming over. They all ran over here because they didn't want me to destroy the deal, which I had concluded was long over, because it was clear to me, and this is as a result of my practice, it was clear to me that this man's participation and the way in which he was presenting himself was not trustworthy, and not in the same vicinity as me. And so there was just going to be continued static all the way down the line to closure. And I wasn't interested in this going this way. It was going to be a win-win for everybody involved, or I wasn't going to do it. So I didn't have to sell my house. I chose to sell my house. So that all came from feeling, from practice, from noticing what is far out of balance. I had to listen to the advice of many people about, including my brothers and the realtors and lawyers, about things that I don't know about. And I have to trust them with the information that they know and then make my own decisions. But if it didn't feel balanced, it wasn't gonna fly. And that's it. I was very clear on that, and I didn't have to stomp my feet about it. I got a little feet stompy when that guy came over, and I told him we were done and he could leave my yard now. And I was clear about it with the realtors too. And everybody kind of just went, oh, okay. And then we went on to the next deal. They didn't try to change my mind. They didn't, a little bit here and there, everybody offered a perspective, and I listened to it, because sometimes there's a perspective that I may not have considered. But if it didn't fit in the balance of what felt like a win-win for everybody, it was not happening. It was just clear to me. I didn't have to dig my heels in. I didn't have to clench my teeth about it, but I did spend time in an extreme that was uncomfortable based on my reaction to this other person. I do get, oh shit, did I just blow this thing? And am I overreacting to this situation? And then when I can feel myself thinking about it too much, trying to solve this problem, I do redirect, and I do try to change my feelings. I know that that's not my ultimate goal. I would like to move a little more elegantly than trying to change, but I recognize that where I'm at is in an extreme, and I'll run through the various things that have worked for me as a result of the practice. Like, I can either change what I'm doing, or I can change the way I'm looking at it. So I call it trying on. I try on this new perspective, like a new outfit. And I try it on, and then if all the points start to fall into place and my practice becomes easy and I pick it right up again, then that's what I'm going to choose to look at. I don't care if it's imagination. I don't care if it's standing meditation. I don't care if it's a beaver crossed my path when I was driving home from my brother's. A beaver ran in front of my car. I've never seen a beaver on the island, and I chose to think that this animal, it felt like something significant, had a message for me. And then I researched beavers being industrious, and beavers being, having a lot of diligence, and beavers building dams to create a new environment. And I decided that I was going to allow my imagination into those areas and embrace those characteristics for myself, because the beaver was teaching me something, just like the view of the hawk. And it was imagination, but it was working. And I tried that on, and boy, I've been carrying this little beaver around. What would the beaver do in this circumstance? People would probably lock me up if they knew what was going on in my head. But it works. I try on different things. It helps me find my points of attention. It helps me find my balance, and then I can proceed forward. So there is still trying, but I don't live in the extreme long. long is a relative term, right? I didn't stay there for 3 days. I retold the story a couple too many times. But once I recognize that I'm in an extreme, I try on different things until I find ones that point me back towards balance, and then proceed forward. And I choose to believe that that's all good. Just like Jean's quote, at the end of the day, I'll know how, there is no end of the day for me. At the end of this extreme, and when I redirect it, I will be able to look back and say, that happened. Sometimes there was a reason for that, or that brought me to this, and this is great. So whatever that was about is not about me anymore, because it's in the past, and it brought me to this, and here we are. So I do try the turning from being in an extreme towards coming back into balance is probably a little wider and more staticky than yours. But I am still doing the process, and I recognize that I'm doing the process, so that eliminates me beating myself up, trying too hard, digging too deep, all of those things that prevent me from turning. So there's a lot of that though with this house sale, because it's all my triggers. It's money, it's security, it's lots of things that are my trigger points. And boy, it's a great demonstration of where the practice is working and where it isn't, and how I need to redirect.
Oh yeah, there's a lot there. So yeah, that's a really good example in a lot of different ways. I think, just to clarify, there's in the beginning of the practice, it's going to be much more difficult to do what Donna's saying, because what Donna is really going by is that feeling. So the human being can exist in an extreme for a short time. The thing about an extreme is it can't be maintained without this whole system going out of whack, and then it will break down, and then it will try to reassemble into a new type of system. And that's a very rough, not usually a very, energy efficient process. And the more that we do this practice, the more that we are paying attention to how we feel and how things feel. And so for me, and I think that this may, resonate for others, not deliberate, no matter what it is, just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like it has power behind it, because it became an automatic response. It became, and it didn't feel like flow either. So that's, flow will feel, it will look automated to somebody else, but it won't feel automated to you. It will feel like everything is just moving how it should. So it'll be a different feeling for sure. So those are kind of different phases of the practice. When we're able to just kind of feel into this, we know that it feels crappy, and we kind of go back to what we were, and yeah, I get it. You want to change how you feel. I mean, ultimately, that's the driving factor behind everything that we're doing, is how we feel. So in some ways, that can't be wrong to want to change how you feel, but it's how we do that. That's the key. We can change how we feel just by going back to the practice, not trying to confront the feeling directly. And I think that's exactly what Donna pointed out. Going back to the practice, going back to our points of attention, redirecting using whatever it takes, whether it's imagination, whether it is the voice of power, telling yourself something you believe, whether it's a beaver communicating to you in some way, however you have to do that. I look forward to reading Donna's book about her communicating with a beaver. See, because in my book, I'm communicating with a lot of different things as well, in a similar fashion, because it works. It helps bring you back to the moment. You can have a dialogue with an imaginary beaver or a real beaver. You can do your thing.
I got to just tell you something that I couldn't help but notice, is that for the first time, I really did notice, I can't say for the first time, but for the first time, it was very clear and apparent immediately that the extreme in happiness and joy also, I woke up after I accepted an offer. And I really, the people are perfect, everything lined up, and there's so many coincidences that if I tell them to you, you will think I'm making it up. But one of which is the buyer is here with the inspector, which is the, the inspector. This is where they try to whittle you down because this is broken or that's cracked or they found a problem. So the inspector's here and he's going through the house and the buyer accompanies him. And I, of course, had to feed them because I can hear my mother going, make coffee and bagels. There's people coming. You have to feed them. And so I did. And my other brother, Anthony, was here. And he's Tony and the buyer is Tony. So I introduced them, Tony, meet Tony. And then we started talking about names and last names and how you spell last names. And he said, coincidentally, my wife had, no, he said, there was a teacher who spelled in Golia that spelled their last name the same as you guys. And Anthony goes, really, what school? And he said, Half Hollow Hills. And my brother said, well, then that would be me. So apparently the buyer's wife was a student of my brother's, as is his sister. And the place that I want to move to, her sister is a doctor of naturopathic medicine. And they noticed in my picture the essential oils on the wall, and it just went on and on and on. The world now has 25 people in it. I'm convinced, and I know them all. So in some way, shape, or form, I'm connected to each one of them, which is true. But what I found was the next day I woke up and I knew that this offer, and it was more than the other guy's offer. It just coincidentally was more money. And is, I don't know, $75,000 more than I thought my highest offer would be. So I woke up the next morning satisfied and happy and wow, this is really amazing. And then I was on to the next thing. Like, okay, now I got to look for my next place. I should start packing. And I felt a little guilty that I wasn't sensationalizing more. Like I should be more grateful. I should be more happy. I should be going out for a drink and a woo-woo celebration. Like, look at everything that happened. And it felt like, no, this is exactly what you should be doing. You are grateful, but you're still peaceful. And this is just the next logical step. And if you want to keep momentum going, you're not going to go to those places because that will distract you from the next logical step and the next logical step and the next thing that feels wonderful and the next thing that feels like a coincidence or the next crap that falls out of this next shitty guy that walks in your yard that you have to throw out. And it all it evens out a little bit. And I was afraid of that in the beginning. I was afraid that the practice was going to take away my emotion. I don't want to be somebody who hardly feels anything. I don't want to be middle of the road. I like my emotions. I like my extremes and emotions. Then I know I'm alive when I feel really sad over something, or that's what makes me compassionate and really ecstatic over something. I don't want people like Ernest to take that away from me, and I realized that that's not what's happening. I feel all of those things. I still feel all of those things, but I can still maintain peace. I might not look to another person. I don't have to be dancing on the table with a bottle of tequila, although I have, and I have liked it. It is an extreme that I don't need to exist in anymore, but I can still feel all of those things and more. So it was the opposite end of the spectrum. It wasn't just, I feel crappy and I want to change that. I also don't want to be in such an elated state that I lose my center. And I finally understand what that feels like. And it doesn't numb me at all. It's the opposite.
Yeah, it's actually, so you'll hear Neo because I think it's time for his walk. He's singing a song of his people, but we could go into this more another time, but it is one of the most essential aspects of balance. And it's something that when you feel it and you understand it, it's like, damn, that's just so obvious. Existing in either extreme is equally unbeneficial over time. The longer you're there, the more it saps your energy. So Donna could have got up on the table and she could have done all of that. And I'm sure that's fine. But it would have felt energy dilapidating, like it required something, and it doesn't have to feel that way. It can constantly feel like it's moving towards something, like it's moving towards this inspiring factor. So it's super important. And this is one of the things that when you look at law of attraction groups, they're just not getting it. They're not getting this balance, and that if you're in Las Vegas on the high flying disc, I'm sorry, but you are a biological creature. You require caloric energy, and doing all of that all the time, your body will express a type of depression because it's in that extreme. So it will go to another type of extreme because it's trying to find that balance. And then that's just not a dynamic that could you imagine a society where everybody is just, imagine Gene right now hooping and hollering, like acting like a woo, all the time.
I've seen it.
I mean, it maybe once, we're
I've seen
allowed
it more
to
than once.
we're allowed to get there. That's the thing, is that we can, like Donna is pointing out, be these emotional beings, but that still have peace of balance. We don't go outside of that hydrostasy circle. Donna's actually really explaining this in her own words really well. There's that bubble, and we can go a little bit left, and that's, getting up on the table and dancing, but then it's like, okay, wait a second. This does feel good, but let me remind myself of humility. Let me remind myself that anything could change in any moment, and that I don't want to act like an ass. Other people may be struggling, and I don't want to be up dancing on the table while other people are in a type of struggle that doesn't feel good either. So I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to be happy, but it's going to be deliberate. It's going to be intentional. It's going to be with other people in mind, that type of thing. The win-win-win that Donna was talking about, super important. Yeah, so I think that's all very, very important, and it is really powerful, and it's something that we're just not seeing represented, because if we go from one type of thought to another type of thought, nothing is really changing. It's not. You may think it is. It may feel like it is because maybe it's new to the mind. Maybe it's exciting to the mind. Maybe you're entertained for a little while. Maybe you just went and saw a new course on something, or you went to a retreat. Now you got that retreat energy, or you watched this video and it was really inspiring. I think all of that has a place. It's really great. But what Donna's talking about, it's not being represented that often because it's not being felt that often. And it's not being felt that often because there's a difference between creating space in the mind and creating balance, and then going from one type of thinking to another. Those are two totally different things occurring. Does that make sense? So I think what Donna is explaining is really important. And in 2 or 3 years from now, that dynamic will just continue to progress. We find ourselves reacting to something in a certain way, and it just gets more efficient and more in flow and more towards the optimal human experience, which is that balance, that peace. And peace doesn't imply mundane or anything like that. It just implies that you have a type of volition, you have a type of awareness and concentration while you're feeling all of these other things. Does that all make sense? Yeah, I think definitely good for a rewatch later for folks as well. So I think this is a good one. I mean, they're all good to repost, but I mean, Donna is giving you an example of what that bubble of perception feels like. When that bubble of perception is firmly established, you can feel when you're starting to extend your own energy, and that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel bad. If you're on the high flying disc in Las Vegas, that doesn't feel bad per se. But if you're truly present and aware, you'll be able to see that this dynamic, I can't maintain this. So maybe it's time to step down off the table and have a glass of water as well. All right, so if you have any questions, you can let me know, but so I'm giving the full example here. We have our golden line that we're creating. You can write these areas of perception. Eventually the elbows, and it's not controlling the elbows. Where are your elbows, or do you even know? If they're flared out, your shoulders will come up. If they're slightly behind you, if you imagine them feeling heavy, the shoulders come down on their own, and that will benefit the body. That will benefit the way the energy flows physically. Things like defocused vision, mantras to yourself, using all of these in your toolbox are super important, and you can take them with you from standing to moving to laying down to sitting. So Gina's sitting right now. Where is the golden line? And the best way to work with this is to check in and then go to other points of attention. We're not trying to manipulate and control, or otherwise we'll start doing weird things with our posture and we'll start cracking our, we don't, that's not what I'm talking about either though. All right, and then so we can continue to build on this. I can continue to add more points of attention, and you can kind of start to fill out that bubble of perception. All right, any questions before we go? Anything else I could add? All right, really good discussion. So thank you, Donna. Thank you for everybody who participated. The book, I did mention this on Facebook, but putting it through that program has been a wild benefit. Like, it was a really good idea for Shayna to put that thing through Grammarly, but it is also putting me behind a little bit because we have to go through each line and make the changes. So I think it's about it'll be about 7 days behind. So we'll get started in the first week of April with the Voice of Power. And that's it. I don't have anything else, I don't think. Podcast is up. I'll put this up on YouTube. We'll have a new book and maybe some other side projects. I'll just see what goes on with this whole job thing. And we'll go from there. It's always a job thing with me. Have you noticed that? There's always some kind of weird ass thing going on with my job. Yeah. And this would be good to talk about at some point too, because there's certain feelings I don't like. And I'm doing certain things to remedy those feelings. So there's action and there's a whole lot of practice involved. But I'll talk about all that. All right, I will see you guys again on Tuesday. I hope you have a great weekend. And if you have any questions, comments, just send them to me and we will talk about them in the group study. And I'll see you for the podcast on Tuesday. If you would like to invite anybody, feel free. I'm good with the size of this group and what we're doing. So you see, I'm not I'm not trying to extend things, too much. But if you want to invite somebody, by all means, I think that the group study is a great place to get started. All right, I will see you guys on Tuesday. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank
See
you,
ya.
everyone. Lovely class. Thank you.
Yep.